We're back with our third installment of Revelation 20 Understood. Next, we're going to cover the feasts in prophecy, which will be a different series, but this will be awesome. Every believer should know this. This last video in this mini-series will deal with the timing of the events here. Let's affirm what we found and see if we can really bring this all home now. Here we go. Let's clarify. We have the timing right here. After the fire falls and Satan is gone, John returns to the day of judgment and writes again. And I saw a great white throne. Many teach this as a second, separate judgment. But John isn't fast forwarding, nor is he on play. He's rewinding here. He's finishing the same day he already saw, the day of judgment itself. Again, it matches all of Scripture and must be the case. There are timestamps here for the judgment of those names not written in the book of life. Sinners, the unsaved, whatever you want to call them, unbelievers. Since when? The foundation of the world, the beginning. That's in Revelation 13:8 and 17:8, which again matches the tone and timeline of all of Scripture. It cannot conflict. That is the beginning of creation definitively. Therefore, the book of life judgment is for all of mankind at once, and it only happens once in Scripture, exactly as we have been seeing. Also, I would like to point out, in verse 6, here in chapter 20, the first resurrection is mentioned again, which is all believers from all of time, to be consistent with all of Scripture. John says the second death has no power. Now, get this, over that group. Now, over those from the first resurrection. This makes sense. Hang on. This means not a single believer, as we said before, saved on the day of judgment, follows Satan's attempted rebellion 1,000 years later. We feel very confident these three videos express the Bible's view, regardless of doctrines of men. We hope that you agree, but test this for yourself. Take this back to the Word. Also, in verse 11 of chapter 20, the language really clarifies when this is on the timeline. When John writes, "Earth and the heaven fled away." This is at the time of the great white throne judgment. That's critical. In other words, heaven and earth had not been renewed yet at the time of the great white throne coming down. And New Jerusalem did not come down yet either. That's in chapter 21. So, no place for the righteous to abide for the 1,000 years, if this was accurate to be read that way. To us, this fails. Otherwise, if reading this as 1,000 years later that the great white throne judgment occurs, then we had heaven and earth being, remade twice, which fits no Scripture at all. On another note, in verse 14 of chapter 20, death and hell are also cast into the pit. That means there is no death nor hell for humans 1,000 years later, because both are already gone 1,000 years earlier. Again, no one falls when Satan is released. There's just nothing there that says so. No human, that is. Revelation is a series of visions, not necessarily a timeline on a ruler. Certainly, they progress, but not always in exact order, as this time. Let's see how. After showing the end of Satan, John returns to the beginning of that very moment to show how it ends for all creation. The judgment of mankind is not that of Satan. The vision folds back like lightning flashing from east to west. Same day, different angle. That's all. Scripture never teaches 2 days of judgment. It's just not there. We've covered mega scripture. We'll go through a little here now. Again, Hebrews 9:27, it is appointed unto men once to die, and after this, the judgment. No, we're not judged upon death. That's not what it's saying. That's never what Scripture says. And by the way, in order to say that we immediately go to heaven or we immediately go to hell upon death, it requires that judgment that does not occur until the day of judgment. Watch our series, Where Do We Go When We Die? It is powerful. Judgment does not come twice. No. Yes, there are 2 judgments, sinners and righteous, but those happen on the same day. There is 1 day of judgment, period, called by different names, such as the great and terrible day of Yahuwah in Scripture. You'll see these things, and very clearly it is referring to 1 day, 1 day, 1 day, not 2. In Revelation 20:11 through 15, it simply re-describes that single event from heaven's vantage point. We covered other witnesses to that concept in part 1, of course. There is no second resurrection for the wicked, only the second death, right? First in the flesh, second in spirit. That's the way that works in all of Scripture. Only their final appearance before the throne. 1 time, not 2, and not waiting around for 1,000 years to be judged. They're just not. On a replenished earth, which all of Scripture says happens on the day of judgment. That would not make any sense. In fact, when you look at it from this supposed traditional view, which is not traditional at all, it's a new strange doctrine is what it is, in our view. It doesn't connect, and it actually would leave one with many more questions, which, by the way, we've gotten those kinds of questions from many over the years that we've been teaching, because we're not the only ones that are seeing this, of course. As one viewer even pointed out, and this is really cool in comments if you look at the last video, this alternative group of people theologically creating almost a lesser species yet again in Scripture. Why? It's just never there. It seems an aim of some to inject Nephilim, hybrids, and a different species, and it fits no Scripture. However, it's just not there. It's just not. Now, I understand there are people that are espousing such doctrines. They're not the ones that came up with that. This was infused into Christianity long ago, centuries ago in some cases, but much in the 1800s, which a whole lot of Dark Age theology was drudged up during that time and renewed and deepened largely. And that's what we view this as. The traditional view is Dark Age theology. The Bible just doesn't say that. In fact, it even seems a rehashing of Judaism's really racist approach. Let's call it what it is. Let's use accurate words, folks. When they basically say that Goyim, Gentiles, are a lesser species in existence. Are you kidding? Could you be more racist? That's ridiculous. But see, you also see it in Islam. They have the kafir, or unbelievers, that the Quran treats as cattle, which in fact you're allowed to treat basically as cattle. That's racist, and I mean highly. I mean, those kinds of doctrines just plain should be what the world is screaming about, rather than, so-and-so made a statement and then it's taken out of context as being such. And the Catholic Church is heretic, really the same thing, folks. It really is. It's basically a common thread in all religions. If you don't believe, as we believe, then, well, you should be treated as a lesser species of person. And that's what this doctrine seems to espouse. Such is never found in Scripture. Gentiles were saved in the days of Abraham as well as the days of Moses. Read it. We've covered that well. Verse 12 says, "And the books were opened," and then it goes on, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. That book is opened only once in Scripture by Yahushua himself on the day of judgment, not 1,000 years later. He does not reopen it then. If this were a new era, it would require a new book, a second book of life, a second resurrection, and a second death, or really a third death, and even heaven and earth recreated, well, twice, none of which exist in Scripture. It doesn't fit. There would have to be death when there is, well, no more death, in fact. John says, "The sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them." This mirrors Yahushua's own words in John 5:25 through 29, such as, "All that are in the graves shall hear his voice." There we have yet another witness from the lips of Messiah that there is one resurrection of mankind, not two, only one, and a resurrection unto damnation for unbelievers, both on the same day of judgment. He then says, the hour is coming, not millennial distance. The same event, same resurrection, same judgment, seen now from the cosmic perspective. And finally, whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. This happens on the day of judgment, not 1,000 years in the future. That's the very same lake where the beast and false prophet already are, and Satan will be cast 1,000 years later. Remember, John has returned to the day of judgment here for mankind, not the latter one of Satan. And that's what's being conflicted, because he fast forwards to tell us of Satan's end, but then he comes back, returning to mankind and the day of judgment for mankind, not the day of judgment for Satan and his leftover demons and minions. No new realm, no new timeline, one conclusion: the total end of rebellion. First rebellion ends for mankind on the day of judgment, when Yahushua takes the throne forever, not just a millennia. There is no such thing as a millennial reign in Scripture. It's just not there. It's not problematic. It's fine if people say it, because he does reign for 1,000 years, but then he continues to reign forever. So once he takes the throne, it's forever. Satan's judgment is 1,000 years later. Why? Yahuwah has always tested mankind. Understand that. This is his final test, and this time for mankind. For the first time, mankind passes the test, and Satan fails. See, this is the end of the story in terms of evil, and that's the whole point here. Realize he even had Yahushua tested. So if any of us think, my God wouldn't do that to me, well, yeah, he would, because he says he will in Scripture many times. He left Satan around all of this time in order to test us, because he wants us to be tested. Why? Because if you enter his physical presence and you're not righteous, your body dies. That's what happens. So why would we be exempt? Of course we're not. Revelation isn't written like modern history. It's a prophetic scroll, visions layered, overlapping, repeating. In order to understand it, we must reconcile it to the rest of Scripture, as we've done here. Otherwise, that leaves conflicts no one needs. Now again, take this to Scripture yourself and test it. John's rewind in verse 11 completes the story, not extends it. He sees the same day of judgment, first from earth, then from eternity. The day of Yahushua is singular, complete, and eternal. And by the way, that's the way Scripture treats it throughout the Old and New Testaments. Even in the book of Enoch, you'll see all of it ties together in the same framework, which is how Scripture should operate. If we're not reconciling all of these, And then understanding is going to be tough. The fire falls, the books open, the righteous rise, the wicked perish, and all creation becomes new. Now understand, heaven and earth were not remade in the flood. The earth itself, its surface specifically, was renewed, replenished, and that's the word used, replenished. And that's a big difference between what's coming in the day of judgment, when it is completely purified. And imagine, as we're up in the air, that's why we go into the air, we're in between what's known as heaven and what's known as earth. And as we're there, we're going to be witnesses of heaven being remade and earth being remade right before our eyes. Now, this is something that Adam never saw. See, that is amazing. Now imagine, we're going to see creation. So when we fast forward 1,000 years later, do you really think that any believer could possibly ever believe Satan again, especially since we already know what's going to happen? And we certainly will at that time. Revelation 20 doesn't multiply events, it magnifies one. One resurrection, one judgment, one king. For full study, go back and watch part 1 through this one, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, right? I know we get comments all the time on part 3 that haven't watched part 1 or part 2 and completely missed the context. We will most certainly mute such because it's ridiculous. Watch the first resurrection and the second death and start from there. Read the complete article at thesmokingquill.org. And remember, Scripture confirms itself. Prophecy never contradicts prophecy. The number one error of modern, what they call textual criticism, is a failure to reconcile, and really taking a critical, scoffing attitude probably doesn't help either. The day of judgment was never divided, only misunderstood. Take this back to the Word, test it, and challenge tradition. Please remember to subscribe, like, and comment. These things supposedly make a difference in the algorithm, assuming it's not just censoring you, which, we kind of know a little about. However, to truly be notified of our latest uploads, books, events, and more, go to thegodculture.org and click the subscribe box, leaving your email with us. We will notify you ourselves. Always remember, prove all things for yourself. Yah bless to everyone.